Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Dawson. Welcome to Leader Talk. This show is proudly brought to you by Brainiact. Each week we are meeting with incredible leaders from around the world to discuss all things leadership and business insights. Each person coming on this talk show has given up their valuable time for one very clear purpose: to give back to small and medium business owners. Many of us will agree that having a purpose in both business and our personal life will help us achieve our goals. The importance of having this strong purpose will also help us navigate through challenging times. Today, my co-host, CEO of Peerlight, Gus Arianto, and I are fortunate to chat to our guest speaker, Lucy Jones, CEO of Neuroblastoma Australia, a not-for-profit Australian-based children's cancer charity. Lucy is here today to talk to us about how the importance of having a clear and strong purpose is the key element for success. Welcome to the show, Lucy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me along today.
Lucy, welcome, and thanks for donating your time for us today.
It's not a problem. I'm delighted to be on the show, and hopefully I can share some of the learnings I've had over the last 12 to 15 years in the not-for-profit space.
Can't wait to share your insight. Thank you.
And thank you, Lucy. And we do need to make note that this is the first time that we are chatting to the CEO of a not-for-profit charity. So thank you so much, Lucy. We have so many questions for you. But before we ask the questions, we do have two fun questions that we always ask all our guests. So we have yours. And the first we'd love to ask you is, what is your favorite time of the day and why?
So I would say my favorite time is around 6 o'clock, because normally by that time I'm easing off and I've done most of the work, and I can actually start relaxing and thinking, yes, I've achieved what I needed to do normally, or I've at least ticked the key things I needed to get done. And it's just sometimes a nice time to just take a step back and reflect on what you've done during the day.
That's great. What about you, Gus? Are you a morning or afternoon person?
Yeah, I'm a morning person. So, I don't know why. Since I was little, by 5 o'clock, I'm already awake. And between 5 and 8, I just happy. I don't know why. Doesn't matter what the day looks like, the rain, storm, thunder. Between 5 and 8, I always happy because look forward for the breakfast. Look forward for everything like that. So, and because I walk with my dogs, so in the morning. So.
I love this question because everyone is so different. No right and wrong. We're all just different and love different times. And Lucy, second question: if you could instantly become an expert in something, what would that be?
It probably would be on human behavior, because I still feel after all this time and interaction and experience with people, I still often kind of go, why did they do that? Like, I don't understand sometimes people's reactions or responses, and that could be my own limitations. But I have been actually studying psychology as a result of this sort of curiosity. So I'd actually like to really become an expert in that subject, so I'm never sort of surprised by what somebody does.
Oh, how interesting is that? And Lucy, before we go on to ask you some questions, we were hoping you can actually share with us your story. So your story, and also tell us a little bit about Neuroblastoma Australia.
Sure. So I guess it sort of makes sense to start really at the very beginning, because it really was a journey I went on, and it is a journey that I really wouldn't wish on anybody else, because it was a journey involving a lot of trauma and tragedy. But it's a journey that has led me to where I am today, and I think it's important to share it. And it's also part of my sort of, I guess, mission and values to actually explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and why it's so important. So really it started with my own little daughter, who was 9 months old at the time, Sienna, who was a bit off her food. She seemed a perfectly healthy baby in every other way. But we moved to Australia from the UK, and literally within about 6 weeks of getting here, she just wasn't seeing, well, she just seemed to be off her food, etc. So I took her to the GP. He thought she was fine. Anyway, backwards and forwards a number of times. And in the end, I just had a gut instinct to take her to hospital. So I took her to hospital, to Sydney Children's Hospital at Randwick. And we were there for about an hour or so. And then they said, her abdominal area is quite enlarged. Is she eating her food? And I said, well, she's only 9 months old, so she's a bit off and on, but the GP thought she was fine, and they said, oh, look, we do need to do an ultrasound. And, at this stage, my partner, we were just thinking, okay, well, it can't be anything serious. She's perfectly healthy in every other way. It's just she's maybe got a virus or something. But then after the ultrasound, we were in a waiting room, and suddenly, 2 doctors appeared and a social worker appeared, and they said, look, we've got some news for you. We're pretty sure your daughter has a very large tumour in her abdomen, and we're pretty sure it's what's called neuroblastoma. And at that point, I'd never ever heard of neuroblastoma, and we were like, well, what's that? And like, well, why is this tone all so serious? And our world went from being really lighthearted to this horrible weight on our shoulders, and I guess element of the unknown suddenly being thrust upon us. And they were just said, oh, look, it could be quite an aggressive tumor. We don't exactly know what type it is, and we're going to have to do lots of tests and do biopsies, etc., and send them to the United States and everything else. So, you're just going to have to bear with us. So that really then marked a period of us sort of staying in hospital, going through lots of tests and operations, and unfortunately finding out that our daughter had the most aggressive type of neuroblastoma, and being told she was a high-risk child who had a 40% chance of survival. And we kind of, were suddenly shattered that how could a baby have cancer? I mean, how could our baby have cancer? Because she seemed fine, and there's no history. We haven't done anything. You start blaming yourself. Is there anything that you did? So you go through this whole sort of mixture of feelings and trying to come to terms with you being told that the child who is supposed to be, your successor has suddenly got this dreadful disease and they might not survive. And then literally you're given this sort of sequence of treatments that the child has to go through. So they're all very, very intensive treatments. They last weeks and months. So really it takes about 9 to 12 months to get through all the treatments, and you're spending a lot of that time in hospital. So there's obviously high dose chemotherapy, there's radiotherapy, there's then there's also the operation to remove the tumor. There's also then a stem cell transplant, which is really probably the worst part of all the treatments, where the child's given a very, very high dose of chemotherapy that almost, destroys the whole immune system. And there were a few days where you're just waiting, where your child is very ill, very sick, and you're waiting for the stem cells which have been given back to the child to start literally rescuing the child so it can survive. And it's really touch and go quite often for a number of days. So you're in isolation for at least 4 weeks during that period. So you go through all these very intensive treatments, and then quite often at the end of the treatments, the child has to go back into hospital, not from the treatment, but because of their immune system so bad that they've picked up another illness or virus, and you have to be readmitted. So I think we had about 61 admissions in 18 months into hospital during that time. So you're constantly there, living there, very little sleep, often in wards with alarms going all through the night, living on a knife edge. And then you're just hoping that all these very intensive, quite painful treatments are going to save your child. And, it was just a different world, and just your whole being is focused on trying to save your child. And we had hoped, obviously, with all the treatments that my daughter went through, that, she would survive. But very sadly, about 11 months after completing treatment, when she was in remission, a new tumor did appear. And there's no cure for relapsed neuroblastoma. So when we did that routine scan, and the doctor sort of advised us that, oh, look, we've reviewed the scans, and unfortunately there is a new tumor. We knew at that point that the chance of survival was 0%. So you still trying to find something to save your child. So literally you're discussing with the oncologist, are there any clinical trials? What are the options? I was literally Googling and emailing experts all around the world saying, what can you do to save my child? And, is there anything out there? You're absolutely quite desperate. As you relate to, if you're not a parent, and you just understand just the terrible situation that you face. And look, we did find a clinical trial and we were hoping to embark on it. And we were doing some other treatment in the interim to try and hold the disease at bay. But unfortunately, neuroblastoma tends to mutate and develop and actually become chemo resistant. So unfortunately, one of the tumors then actually became totally resistant to all the treatments we were doing and just really took off exponentially and just developed very, very rapidly. And we lost our daughter Sienna when she was 2.5 years old. So for me, that was just totally unacceptable that, you know, these young children are diagnosed with a disease, which is basically, it's a random chance. It's from a embryonic nerve cell that's literally remaining in the body after the baby's been born, that for some reason it hasn't then developed correctly and has then mutated and the body hasn't recognized that. So it's just very unfortunate that there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that this happens. And then their children have to go through so much treatment in an attempt to save them. And then that half of them don't actually survive. It just isn't good enough. And for me, I just could go, oh, that was just part of my life. And now I just go back to what I was doing before, which was in the corporate world. For me, it just really wasn't an option. I mean, I was quite frankly, obviously also very overwhelmed by the situation at that point. But for me, just to go back to the other world that I knew was just not an option. And so for me, I felt, you know, compelled. I had to do something. I had to speak out about what was going on, because it's literally, you know, happening right now still as I speak, that, you know, these children are going through hideous amounts of treatments, a lot of pain, and then often they're not making it. And it's just not good enough when we're living in a country that has so many means. I feel a certain responsibility to say something, because specifically the young children who are affected, they can't speak for themselves. They're too young. And the majority of the cases, they're babies, infants, toddlers. So who's going to represent them if the parent doesn't?
Look, I've spoken to you before, Lucy, and, you know, I was absolutely touched by the story, and, you know, hearing it again, as a mother of 3, it is really hard to listen to, and, you know, really sorry for everything you went through. And we're hoping that everyone listening out there can also learn a lot from, you know, everything that Lucy will talk about, and hopefully be able to help out as well. So thank you for sharing that, Lucy. I know it's not easy.
No, it's fine. And I think, you know, for me, you know, part of it is sharing is important. It's maybe part of my grief as well. But if we don't share it, if we don't tell people, how do people know about it? People can't help if they don't know about it. So it's important. And, you know, and I'm aware, you know, it is an upsetting subject, but I can't avoid it because I need to tell people.
And just so everyone, sorry, Gus, I was just going to say, just so everyone knows, even Lucy, I knew nothing about neuroblastoma. The way we came across Neuroblastoma Australia is we were actually looking for a team wellbeing event that Elite Words could take part in. And we stumbled across this event, Run to Cure, that was for Neuroblastoma Australia. And it wasn't until we started reading these stories did we understand that, you know, what is neuroblastoma. So you're right, Lucy, a lot of people won't even know. So it is everyone's job to get the message out there. So thank you.
Lucy, if you don't mind, I want to ask, referring to your story, incredible story. I can't even picture the pain and, you know, that moment where you and your family have to endure. And then you end up creating organization, Neuroblastoma Australia, based on your experience. So my question is like this: in business, so if you don't mind, I relate it to business.
Sure.
We will have bad moments, bad experience, which is in comparison to your experience. It's not even 0.005%. 0.00005%. You know, people that opening a small business, whatever it is, whether it's a flower shop, whether it's a plumbing shop, whether it's a mechanics kebab shop, my favorite company in the world. You know, the moments that we will have bad moments, whether it's business going down, whether it's whatever it is. And a lot of people unable to come back and stand up and continue. Now, in your case, you utilize your experience to build a greater thing to help. And that's been 15 years. That's been 15 years. So I'm just interested to understand how do you hold that? Like, how do you, like, I know from the face value, it sounds easy. Well, I use my experience, but surely it's painful because the experience that hold you is so painful, but yet the way you tell the story, the way you share it, it's full of kind energy that end up make you successfully build a, more than a decade's organization helping these children. I don't know whether my question is clear or not. I just want to understand. So if we have a business and we have a experience, in business, not even in family or health, what's your suggestion for us to be able to keep going?
Yeah, no, I think it's a question that quite a few people ask me how I keep going, and particularly they say, "Oh, it must be so hard for you to do it," and it was actually really hard, and sometimes it's still hard. But I guess I've also become very familiar with the situation, and I feel it's my cause, so it's my passion. So for me, it's like thinking, well, if I need to do this, and if I don't do it, it's not going to change things. So it's very much focused on the end goal. I also, I sometimes will have a day where I do meet somebody who's really not interested at all, who might be quite rude, and and I feel like I've maybe explained the situation well, but maybe I haven't because of their reaction and total disinterest or even rudeness. And I find that quite hard. But at the end of the day, I need to kind of go, okay, that was one person. Actually, there are lots of other people out there who are really decent, compassionate people. And I often come across them too. And that just really changes everything. So it's always believing, yes, that's one person, but there are other people out there who actually really are keen to help. I mean, look at Natalie. Natalie was one of them who, my story resonated with her. So, Natalie was then interested, if I say this correctly, Natalie, to then actually help. And it's often that's the right way is to think, yes, there are down moments. There are sometimes really bad periods in your life, but they don't last forever. Or you do have to make the best of a bad situation. You have a choice of basically surviving or not surviving. And I definitely had that choice after my daughter died. And it was like, for me, I have been given this life. I need to make the most of it. And certainly it's true. And it helps me, whether it might help another person or not. But, my daughter certainly wouldn't want me throwing my life away. If I can do something constructive with it, I will do. So I think it's thinking of the ultimate goal of your life, actually, and taking a step back and not letting the small things cloud your journey too much and putting them to one side and go, yep. And often it's not to take things personally. It's not because of what you said or you did. You have to appreciate that maybe somebody's got something else going on in their life, which made them be rude to me, So I have to also understand that people have their own issues, their own troubles. And, our interaction might not really be reflective of them as a person. So it's often just saying, okay, it was really annoying, really frustrating, but move on. Go to the next thing and keep your vision clear.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And Lucy, just ask, can you share with us that moment when you actually decided to start Neuroblastoma Australia? Was it a specific moment or something? Like, how do you actually decide? I mean, people are asked all the time in the business world, how do you decide to start a business? My question to you is, when was it a pivotal moment? Was there something that,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think I had that sort of light bulb moment, as it were. I think it was actually more like an organic thing that happened. And I think it was, I literally did my first fundraiser when Sienna was alive, and she'd been diagnosed and had just finished treatment. And, we were all hopeful at that stage that she'd be a survivor. But So I did my first fundraiser and thought, because I just felt straight away like when I was asking the doctors all these questions, they didn't actually know some of the answers. And I was like going, well, how come, like, how come there aren't the answers? Like, surely we were in like 20 at the time, 2009, surely the information. Everything's been researched about this disease. It's a childhood cancer. Surely the children have been looked after, and then you've got the information. They said, no, we haven't. We don't know the answers because there's not enough research being done, because it's a rare disease and childhood cancers generally are rare diseases. There's not the same amount of research as there might be in bigger adult cancers, that there's a lot more information about them. So actually, we can't tell you what the right thing is to do here or there. So yeah, I think that was a big learn for me, that actually childhood cancers need a lot more support. And it made me think, well, why, again, I just need to do something. So why don't I just do a fundraiser and let people know the situation? So that's really how it started. And I did that I did a sausage sizzle, I think, to begin with. And then I did a fun day. And then I did a gala dinner. And it was all with help of my friends just coming together and helping me. And then we met another family, and they had a similar situation. Their daughter, Howard, was on treatment and was a survivor, and they wanted to get involved. So then they actually did a big family fun day. And then I started doing the fun run. And then it literally, through discussions with this other family, like, it was like, well, we need to sort of make this a clear organization. And let's just, my group at that point was called Sienna Hoffman and Friends. It's like, well, no, we actually need to call it a proper charity name. So let's call it Neuroblastoma Australia, and actually set up a proper charity, proper structure that people can actually then recognize, and we can build, and people can come to if they need help and support.
Am I correct, Lucy, to take what you just shared in context of business? Many people waited until they have a perfect business before they open up, and then they never open and never go forward. When I hear what you're doing, you start with a charity, you talk to your friends, you restarted, you change the name along the way, you fix the website. So what you're saying is, your story tells me that you don't wait until Neuroblastoma Australia set up as per today. You actually started because the purpose wasn't, block you to start early. So you don't say, I will start when I have X amount of dollars to support. Basically, you said, I want to start even if it's only saving one person.
Yeah, I think that's true in this instance. I think I also had a huge sense of urgency, because it's like children are dying all the time from this disease. So it's like, I just need to get on and do stuff and try and help, because it's the longer, it takes, the more children are going to die. So, ultimately there was a huge sense of urgency there. I mean, the other thing is, I guess my type of personality is I'm thinking, well, what can I do? Oh yeah, I can organize things. So let's do an event. And hey, that was quite successful. That worked. Let's do it bigger. And let's make it, and each year, like, I'll just make it bigger and bigger. And it's kind of my ambition, and just like, well, we can now do that. We've tested it. We can do it. So it was kind of measured, the approach. I didn't sort of go like, I'm just going to go crazy, because I didn't necessarily have all the expertise at that point. So it was testing the waters in some situations, and then that worked. So it's like, let's expand on that. I think if your personality is not sort of, so maybe like, what I would say, like spontaneous, and you want to plan more, it is also sensible to do that, and actually just go, okay, let's work out the phases. But I think you're right as well, is you kind of have to make the leap of faith at some point that you're going to do it. And then you just got to go, yes, this is my vision. I've planned it out. These are the phases, and break it up into smaller chunks if you need to, but then get started and give yourself a clear sort of end goal.
And I think what's really important here, Lucy, is you mentioned the purpose. Your purpose is really clear. You're going to keep going until there's a cure for neuroblastoma. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, ultimately, it's like, well, the overriding goal is we need to get a cure. I have learned along the way, because initially I just thought, let's just get a cure, thinking you can just get a cure really easily if we put money into it. But actually I've learned now that a cure does take a long time. So what you end up doing is you actually fund improvements in survival rates, and you increment, year on year, you might get an incremental gain of 5 to 10%. So it takes, maybe, it depends on that. You might suddenly get a jump in survival rates, but generally you don't get 100% cure rate overnight. So I've also learned that along the way. So I also have to think, okay, the ultimate goal is to get to that cure, but I also understand that it's not immediate, that we've got to work to get to that cure, and it will take phases. So that's also sometimes a learning, is understanding that, maybe your vision is to achieve a certain amount of funding or a certain market share, but that there are obviously steps along the way, and understanding those steps.
And Lucy, how do you separate your, so in what you do, you very comfortable said, well, because of the aggressiveness of this illness, cure, 100% cure, it's still a long way. So you talking about survival rate, and the survival rate is not high as well. How do you separate your emotion to the fact that every day you digging the ground, you putting the seed, and the thing not growing, and most of the time the seed is dying? How do you balance that? That in most business, that's why I can't even compare what you're doing to business. In most business, if the word survival rate of what we do, not survival in terms of human, but in terms of what we do not turn into something, is even 10% out of whack, we will call ourselves failing, and we probably losing sleep for something, no one dying. Now you involved with such a high emotions, 15 years, you see the movement of the dial is probably slow. How do you, what message do you give us in context of business as well, so we can stay, like, I don't know, I keep repeating this question because your story is so special that I will keep asking, how do you wake up every day when the dial not jumping substantially?
Yeah. And look, it is a very good question. And I think it is something which it does challenge me some days. I'm not going to say it doesn't. It's like, oh, am I really achieving what I need to achieve? And I'm quite a, I guess, strict judge of my own self. And I am sometimes frustrated that I haven't, changed things radically. I'd love to do that, and I haven't done that. However, I'm also perhaps realistic that what we have done, it actually is helpful. I think we funded a number of really good research projects, and some of them are definitely leading to much bigger research projects, which should lead to clinical trial, which should lead to change in treatment, which should lead to better survival rates. There's no doubt about it. There's a huge number of areas where I'd still like to see a lot of change, but I think it's being realistic as well, that what can I change as a small charity, very small team. I haven't got a huge network. We're pretty weak on lobbying and advocacy really within the community. But because, it is hard, but I guess the alternative is for me to do nothing. That isn't an alternative for me. So the reality is I need to make change, and I need to do it, and I need to understand it. Probably it won't be at the speed that I want it to be at. I have to live with that frustration, but not give up on that goal. And it's also thinking, actually looking back and also reflecting on the successes is encouraging, and thinking, actually, it's not fast enough for where I'd like it to be, but we actually have made some grounds, and we can build on that, and we are going in the right direction. Accepting, yes, I'd like to step on the accelerator, but it's just like it's not always as achievable as I would like. But I guess I just feel I have to keep going, because if I don't, that's not going to help the kids. We are making some inroads, and I need to build the support, and I need to build the charity, so actually we can actually gain more traction. So that's kind of the realization I've had as well. I think there's also that learning along the way that sometimes you can't achieve everything you want to because you're just one person or you're a small team, and that is sometimes where you think, oh, I haven't got the skill sets to do that, so I need to get someone in to help me to do that, or I do need to invest to grow. And sometimes that's a difficult decision because it means spending more money when you haven't necessarily got lots of money, or you feel very concerned about that money. But you sometimes have to make that decision as well. Like, actually, if we really want to do this, we need to invest more in this function or in this skill set so we can achieve it.
Yeah. And Lucy, you mentioned, the purpose. Yeah, you've got the purpose, but it's celebrating the small wins. I think that's really important, that people often forget. They've got their purpose, and that's fine, but it takes small wins to get to that. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And I think that I guess I'm not as good as I should be at celebrating small wins, but I'm getting better at recognizing them. But I think it is really important to look back. And I even, need to look back over the last 10, 12 years to see where we've come from, and now what we are doing as a charity is significantly different. And we're offering a lot more support to families. We've got a proper grant process. We've got a scientific advisory board. We've got a lot more status, we're generally within the community. So we've got, developed a really, great team. So look, basically the lots of things that you don't often stop and look at, but you should do, and just go, okay, compared to 10 years ago, what's the difference? Or compared to 5 years ago, what's the difference? And it also makes you feel like, okay, yes, maybe we've developed in this area, but we still need to develop that area. And that's fair enough as well.
Yeah. And I just, this topic of purpose, I really like this, because your purpose is so clear. And, with your story and everything, curious to know, how do you actually transfer this purpose to the team that you're working with? Is that difficult?
Especially, maybe I want to add.
Yeah, because that's what I'd like to know.
Your purpose, not necessarily your team purpose.
Yeah.
And how do you translate that so every day they can support you at their best capability? Because I think in every organization that will be similar. I have a purpose. My team might not share the same purpose. And how do you transfer that?
Look, I guess for me, it's, often you're leading by example as the manager of a company. You have to, for me, live and breathe what you're saying, or, if that's your vision, you need to be behaving consistently with that vision. And I think there's a lot of importance about being consistent. And I'm, it's one of my kind of key values is being reliable and consistent. And, I kind of think, no, that's what we're doing. That's what we're saying we're doing. That's what we do. And simply treating people, I think that's really important, to be consistent and fair and open with people. So I try to be that. I think in terms of motivation, obviously they can see my passion, but then they can also read and see the emails we receive and the stories we get. So it's not now my story, it's a story of other families that we have and we interact with. And, the stories that we have today are very similar to my story from 10 years ago. It's not a huge difference, unfortunately. There is an improvement in survival rate from the last 10 years of about 10 to 15%, which is obviously a huge bonus. But we definitely want to get that much higher up, because children, as I mentioned, are still very sadly passing away from this disease. So I think the people who are attracted to work for the charity, they have a big heart, and they actually also engage with the cause, and they actually see the value of working for the charity, and see, for them, often, they have children, or they know children, and they relate to the value of children, how precious they are, and the thought of losing a child obviously is devastating. So I think they also kind of realize the unfairness of the situation that these young children have to endure, and that they're losing their life at such an early stage, with their whole future ahead of them. So I think there are two elements. There's maybe me as a passionate person about the cause, being consistent, and then there's also the type of person who wants to actually also work within a not-for-profit and within childhood cancer.
Yeah. Lucy, just listening to everything you're saying, resilience is a topic that's kind of coming to my mind because, your story shows a lot of resilience. You've established Neuroblastoma Australia. How do you build this resilience in both yourself and then the team, especially with what you're dealing? You're saying you're getting these letters. It's not easy. And yet you, like Gus said, you wake up every day and you keep going. How do you build this resilience? Because we need resilience to run. If we're running a charity, not-for-profit, small, medium, large business, we all require this. Do you have any tips that you can share with us?
Yeah, look, I think with some of the stories, they're very, very sad. And, I'm obviously affected by them. I think it is important to try and give yourself space. So, even if it's, it's like the weekend, trying to do something different from my charity work. I'm often guilty of not doing that, but generally I try and do maybe something else. And also trying to do some actual physical activity even during the week as well, trying to get, with some fresh air, whatever, trying to get a bit of a space, a break away from the intensity of certain situations. I think it's important. I think also reflecting on things and understanding your own limitations in what you can do, because as much as I'd love to save somebody's child, I can't, and I wish I could, but you have to manage your own feelings, and just saying you're doing everything you possibly can, and you can only achieve so much. And I think that's been a lesson for me, because I've always wanted to achieve far more in a way than I can. And I think it goes back to being realistic, in terms of that resilience, is being realistic as to what you can actually achieve. And if you push yourself too far, you will burn out. So I think you have to also accept that there's a risk. If you keep putting yourself under constant stress, constant work, don't take breaks, it's not going to actually be advantageous in the long run. You actually really need to actually manage your own self, and actually also just be in tune with yourself. And I feel I can sometimes feel myself feeling increasingly anxious, etc. And that's when you kind of think, okay, I do need to maybe step away a bit more, take more of a break, etc. And I think it's also just listening a bit to your own body, your own mind, and making sure that you are respectful of it, and actually just make sure you do build in space within your week where you can. And I know that's not always possible if you're saying trying to rescue a business or everything is just flat out, but somehow, and I think somebody said this to me, is even when you're looking after a child in hospital, I just did not want to leave my daughter's side, and I was physically and emotionally exhausted. And they said, look, if you don't, you're not going to be a good parent. You actually are going to have to find some rest, because you just aren't going to be able to look after your child if you have a breakdown. So it's like, actually, that's a really good point. Actually, you do need to make sure you build in strategically some time. It doesn't have to be very much, but whether it's mindfulness, and I definitely did a bit of mindfulness a while back, or some people like meditation or yoga or walk in the fresh air, you do need to somehow pull that in. From my perspective, if you're in a very stressful situation or in a role that involves quite a lot of stress.
And is it difficult, Lucy, to identify, like, how hard would it have been for you to hear that saying, you need to leave your daughter, to realize that you need to actually look after for yourself? Because a lot of leaders out there, you're right, they, you hear stories, I work 7 days this week. I know myself, sometimes we have some projects and we're working to early hours of the morning, and yes, it is exhausting. And then you're onto your next day. How difficult is it to identify and go, do you know what? I need to take time for myself. Was that difficult for you to do? Because I just want leaders and business owners out there to realize it's okay to do this.
Yeah. Look, it was really difficult, particularly, every time I left my daughter, she'd scream. So, but then, my husband was there, and I just go, well, actually, he can actually look after her. So, but I'm so stressed, I don't want to leave her. But it's like, you just need to go and lie down. And so it's almost like, okay, I'll just go and lie down for 1 hour so I get some break, and then I'll come back. I think it's understanding that nobody's invincible and it will catch up with you. So you do need to be really careful if you're under that, constant level of pressure. And I think some people just feel that it won't catch up with them because they're very, very skilled, they're very talented, they're very driven, and they feel the necessity of working that amount of time. But they do actually need to really look at themselves and go, okay, it's actually all right. As you say, give themselves permission to go and do something nice for half an hour. It actually really makes a bit of a difference. Strategically manage their time a little bit differently, or whether it's putting in the diary, blocking out half an hour every day, so that half an hour does not get filled up with stuff, just so they have a half an hour where they know they're free, can be useful. So it's just also looking at maybe some tips, or not being worried to ask somebody for help. I think people often don't want to do that, but if it gives them a break, or means one less thing for them to do, it's a real positive thing. It can be helpful, because today's world is so many stresses left, right, and center. And people actually say it's often not one big stress like I had that could really impact you significantly. It's often a combination of lots of little stresses. So I think people need to be aware of that as well.
Yeah. And do you feel that as well, Gus? Like, is it quite difficult to kind of go, okay, now I need to stop, I actually need to take that time out?
Well, Ned, you know my favorite motto, fall 7 times, rest, stand up 8. So just to give a context, Lucy, there's a Japanese proverb. It's called fall 7 times, stand up 8. And what I did, we put the word rest in the middle. So when you talk about rest and resilience, it's really close to me, because people sometimes think that you have to keep going to be resilient. The reality is you need to stop to actually reset. Yeah. And I love your story when a parents have a children in this situation. Obviously, they're calling one to be 24/7 day, but in the absence of rest, they can't be 100% as well. And so I totally agree. The note that I put, which I will read later, but I put it here: build your resilience by resting, strong purpose, and be realistic to the outcome. Because how can you keep going if you unable to keep going? I mean, it's I totally agree with what you see.
And Lucy, sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I think it's right. I mean, otherwise you do get worn out. I mean, that's the bottom line. You get worn out and you get exhausted, and then you can start to lose your purpose. So I think you need to keep the tank topped up, as it were.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And Lucy, you have worked in the corporate world and now CEO of a not-for-profit charity. Just wanted to touch on leadership, because leadership, every business, every organization requires a leader. In your opinion, would love to know, especially running a not-for-profit, how would you yourself describe leadership?
Yeah, for me, it is really the conveying of your purpose and conveying it really clearly and logically, so it makes sense to somebody else. And I think one thing I kind of learned more recently was actually being an effective communicator, because everybody can be a communicator, but to be an effective communicator, you need to make sure that your mission or your words are interpreted in the right way by somebody else, and everybody can interpret things differently, which is often why email is not always a useful tool. But, ultimately you need to explain to people in a way that resonates with them, that engages them, what you're trying to achieve. And then you need to also make it, I guess, clear as to why you're doing it, what you're doing what you're doing to try and achieve that goal. And I think there is also clarity, that's generally people really appreciate. So what's their role? What are they there to do? And I think one thing in the corporate world I always thought was really useful, which I was involved in with a little bit was there was too many people that I was working with at the time, and nobody really understood where their role started and finished and how they interacted with other people. So there was this big project about clarifying roles, and it was like, your role is actually to advise and your role is actually to decide, because otherwise you have loads of decision makers and actually you don't get a decision. So the reality is being really clear as to what people need to do and what's important within that role, and also when is something really important and it's got to be perfect, and when something actually isn't so important and sort of 80% is actually okay. And it took me quite a long time to get to accepting 80% is okay, but I do that now. And I even say to people, look, actually it's not worth the time to get that to 100%. It's good enough. And I feel I'm a person who has quite high standards, but it's understanding from a limited resource perspective, what are the priorities? And I think that's also really key for people to think about is, cut away the dead wood. What's the really key things that need to get done? And then be really clear about what those priorities are, and make sure they're done first and foremost, and they're done at the best standard possible. And then the other things which maybe aren't so critical, and if time is a problem, that you might be accepting that they're not done to the same standard.
Yeah. And for anyone that hasn't seen the Neuroblastoma Australia website, I recommend you have a look, because this purpose that you talk about, Lucy, it doesn't matter what page you land on, what Instagram post you pop up there, because I follow it all. It is very clear. The purpose is clear. And that's the challenge, I guess, for all business owners out there. You need to have this clear purpose, because it'll come through the conversation, it'll come through your posts, it'll come through your live feeds, it'll come through your copy. And that's something that we can all learn so much from you. So you've done an incredible job with all of that, Lucy.
Well, thank you. I think it's, I kind of also think sometimes when it's just sort of come out of me and I haven't really thought about it, and it's been a natural response to what's really happened. But yeah, it's kind of driven me, it gets me out of bed every day, and it keeps me going because I still have that clear passion. And I think it's funny, you're not even conscious of the workload when you have got that passion. You're not, you don't think about the time you're spending on stuff, because you are so motivated to get to that purpose. Work, time does vanish, and you kind of think, well, it's more satisfying than say if you haven't got that purpose, because you're kind of much more conscious of the work you're putting in. You're much more conscious of the time it takes, and then the end result is something which, it's okay, but is it matching your goal in life, or is it matching your values? Questionable.
Yeah.
And what's the website again, Natalie, for the audience?
Is it Neuroblastoma Australia?
.org.au, yeah.
Okay, so neuroblastomaaustralia.org.au.
Neuroblastoma.org.au.
Oh, sorry.
That's right.
It is, and you'll see the pink. I love it.
Word. Sorry, neuroblastoma. We're trying to. It's kind of think, well, what do we do with a word like neuroblastoma? Because it's hard to get people to remember it. But then I kind of think about leukemia, and leukemia is a pretty difficult word as well. And everybody's heard of leukemia, so that's our mission as well, is to make sure people recognize neuroblastoma and they know it's a childhood cancer.
And Lucy, out of everything that you've done in this leadership role, do you have, as it's a difficult leadership role, do you have a proud moment that you can share with us over this time?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was thinking, is there a moment? I don't know if there's a specific moment. I think it's more, again, the fact that we have made so much progress cumulatively over the period of time. And I think that's as you talked about reflecting of, where we were and how far we've come. And I think that sort of overall development I'm really proud of. And the fact that, we've done things to really professional standard, despite being a really small charity, that I feel, incredibly responsible that people donate to our charity, and that we make sure we use that money effectively and we make the most of it, and we can invest in research, which is really, really good research. So I feel really proud that that's what we do. And look, totally, because my previous role was actually a commercial buyer, so I'm pretty strong at negotiation, and I really loathe wasting any money whatsoever. So I feel like pleased and proud that we are, as a charity, in terms of operationally, we're pretty slick, and we're very good at what we do.
That's brilliant. And Lucy, for everyone tuning in and watching future podcasts, can you tell us, for anyone interested in assisting with the research or getting involved with Neuroblastoma Australia, how can we do this? Are there events coming up? Is there anything specifically pressing that we need to know about?
Yeah, well, thanks, Natalie. We have lots of opportunities. I would firstly say that, because we are a small charity, it can be challenging for small charities to get engaged with other businesses, again, for us to get the word out. So it's great today. So thank you, both of you, for the opportunity for me to explain and share my story. So we have a big fun run event, which we have been running every year since 2010, apart from the last 2 years. For obvious reasons, it didn't take place, but we did pivot to a virtual event, which actually did go really well. But it's back. So our fun run, the Run to Cure Neuroblastoma, is in the domain on the 3rd of April. And we're really hoping we're going to get lots of local companies, small, medium, large. We find actually small to medium companies particularly receptive, which is great. Come along, put a small team together and come and run or walk. And there are distances for everyone. So literally from 1K, 3K, 5K, 10K to 21.1K, you can run or walk. So it's just a really positive community event, and it's in the domain, which is obviously a stunning location. So that's on the 3rd of April. So we'd welcome people to come as an individual or get a workplace team together, or even if they want to volunteer. We normally look for around 60 volunteers. So that also makes quite a big difference to us, because, again, as a small charity, for that event to be successful, we actually do need to get sponsors. We need volunteers, so we can literally fundraise as much as possible. So that's an opportunity. We're about to do another golf day, and we'll have another golfing event because they have been really successful. And we hope to get back to gala dinners in the near future. But other than that, we're always keen, like some workplaces want to partner with a charity, and we're really keen on that, whereby we can be your charity of choice, and we can come in and just present to employees or tell our story and explain about it. And sometimes companies do workplace giving or match giving, and sometimes that's an opportunity to work together as well. I kind of think, a lot of companies and businesses realize the value of supporting a cause. It can be really engaging for employees, and quite often, obviously, employees will ask, or companies will ask employees to select a cause, and where they've done that, they have got lots of evidence that it changes the level of engagement, of workplace satisfaction, etc., because they actually are feeling motivated that it's not just working for a company without any sort of maybe long-term value. It's creating more value. So I think there is a commercial element to supporting a not-for-profit as well, and to bring that in, and it's what resonates with your workforce, and I'm aware of that as well. So but I just say, yes, think about what might be motivating to your team, and if you'd like to come and support childhood cancer, which is an area which does desperately need more support, then please consider neuroblastoma.
And look, Lucy, I was going to hold this up because it's still on my desk from the last virtual. I did the 10Ks with my children and my husband, and like Lucy said, we did it for a team building exercise where we did something outside of the workplace. So it didn't even, it was connecting it that way, and at the same time we learnt about neuroblastoma, and at the same time we were donating to a wonderful cause. So that's something for businesses out there to think about.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, Gus.
Yeah. So Gus, can we tempt you to come along?
10Ks, Gus, if I can do 10Ks.
Yes, exactly. One thing that I really get is, I think, when we talk about neuroblastoma, what I learned for the past 1 hour, number one is impacting children. I don't think we can get the head around this, because when we talk about cancer, for example, or tumor, there's so many different types. And of course, doesn't matter what age, it's still impacting the people equally. But when we really catchy for me is it impacting the age bracket where they can voice the pain. For me, that's really touched me, Lucy. Like the people who get neuroblastoma are mostly the people that can't even say I'm in pain. Like that's just so. I think organization need to get involved. We need to really look at this, because the rarity of the illness make this basically I just know about this for the past 2 weeks. There is a word, there is a word called neuroblastoma, and I hope through this we voice the importance of this.
Yeah, so thank you, Gus. I think that's key. It's just, as I said, that they're actually a silent minority, and it's like we actually need to give them a voice. And my voice alone is not strong enough. I actually need, people to come together and voice and speak out for the kids. And I think people, for me, I think, the impact of losing my child is with me every single day. I'm very fortunate. I do have another child. But, if I go to school and I pick them up, inevitably I look at children who might be my daughter's age, and you constantly live that loss. And I think people, it's very different losing that child because of that future. And I think people aren't aware really of the families as well, really what they go through, who have a child with neuroblastoma. So, it would be massively, helpful and really life-changing to a lot of families if we could get more funds into research and really drive it, so we accelerate the research, so we do really speed up the change, so we do get to 100% sooner.
I'm looking forward to the day when we do see on that website that 100% cure rate. That would be incredible.
I know. Yeah.
It would just be incredible. Gus, I'm looking at the time. We're out of time, so I'm going to hand over to you to wrap up. It's going to be a tough wrap up, but over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Lucy, before I wrap up, I just want to say on behalf of Leader Talk, thank you so much. I mean, you share your personal journey, which very, very difficult. We really learn from today's session, and thank you so much for sharing your purpose, your story through Leader Talk. These are some of the key points that I think worth repeated. While it's hard, focus on the purpose and the end goal, because it helps you to continue and grow. Always take the best out of the situation, including the bad situation. To start, don't wait till it's perfect and have a huge urgency and start. So I love that. To start, don't wait until it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And you better make sure you have a huge urgency to start. So it's kind of looping, but I think I really like that one. And then you say also, be realistic. Focus on your purpose and accept it will take time, depending on how big your purpose. Purpose that Lucy Jones take to save children from neuroblastoma is a very big purpose with a lot of time. So it will take longer time. Even after 15, 20 years, the dial don't move compared to me opening a kebab shop, for example. Like if I'm putting a funny comparison, but I think what I really like from your message is it will take time. It will take time. And at the same time, look back and celebrate the fact that you have a small success that happened that will help you to arrive in your goal. Build your resilience by resting, enough resting, so you can have the energy. By have a strong purpose, be realistic. That's what we learned today. And I really hope through Leader Talk that the audience can support Neuroblastoma Australia through the website www.neuroblastoma.org.au, because they are a small charity organization with a big purpose that required help from all of us. So Lucy Jones, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you. It's been great to be live.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And thank you everyone for tuning in. For more information on Leader Talk and for some great resources to help your business grow, check out brainiac.com.au. Thanks, everyone.